Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology coming up in the next hour. Ready, set, hike. President Biden said to be planning the first major federal tax hike since 1993. Those hardest hit, earners making above $400,000. We'll cover how the markets are reacting. Plus, Europe's biggest countries, including France and Germany, suspend AstraZeneca's COVID vaccines amid a health scare that is growing. More on that, plus plans to expand the vaccination network in the U.S. with Moderna co-founder Noubar Afeyan. And remote work seems to be working. A study done by Upwork finds the transition to remote work this year since the U.S. shutdown may be more successful than many companies and executives anticipated. One of the biggest benefits, productivity. All those stories in a moment, but first, U.S. stocks climbing to all-time highs, but Bitcoin not necessarily joining in on the fun. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta and Sonali Basak are standing by. Kriti, let's start with you. What are the markets reacting to today?
Well, it's all about that tech outperformance today. You really saw that in a reaction to that 10-year yield. You can look at the chart behind me right from the top, the S&P 500 in the green, but it's that NASDAQ outperformance once again that really caught my eye. It's not just big tech lifting the major averages, Emily. You're also seeing it in the semiconductors index. Once again, a very broad bid for tech today. I do want to flip up the boards and look at the NASDAQ 100 because, of course, we know that that's an index that's had a little bit of pain. But look at this on a 30-year time frame. And I'm bringing this to you because I want you to look at it in comparison to the 1999 tech bubble that you're seeing further along that chart. Jeffrey Gundlach coming out last week and saying that this ratio, the NASDAQ 100 relative to the S&P 500, is the ratio you want to watch. And this is, of course, a chart of just the former. But if you were to look at them on a comparison basis, you can see those same bubble levels being tested right now. So extremely important from a macro point of view. Also important from a macro point of view is just how electric vehicles are really reacting. Of course, that was the story of the fourth quarter of 2020. But now just look at the outperformance that you're seeing compared to the likes of Tesla, which was, of course, the original electric vehicle name that entered the S&P 500. You can really see that outperformance in the Drive ETF that holds all of those electric vehicle makers relative to Tesla, which is just up 0.3% in the last few months. Sonali, over to you.
Kriti, of course, we saw those retail traders hopping into Bitcoin over the weekend, and Bitcoin really coming down today, trading a little over $5,600. Deutsche Bank is now saying that retail traders, individuals ages 25 to 34, may be spending about 50% of their stimulus checks on retail trades. So you do still see rises in Bitcoin miners and brokerages. That includes Riot, Blockchain, Marathon Digital, Voyager Digital, Galaxy Digital. That's Mike Novogratz's firm. But you also have the Reddit and meme stocks still riding upward today. Sundial Growers, Zomerica Express, costs, all of those still up on the day. We do expect more retail checks to hit later this week, so keep an eye on those retail trades. Emily?
All right, Sonali, thanks so much. And of course, we are beating the drum towards the Coinbase direct listing, which we're expecting in a couple of weeks. Meantime, now that the stimulus has passed, President Biden is turning his attention to tax reform as he's planning the first major tax hike since 1993. Joining us now, Bloomberg's Laura Davison. Laura, tell us what we know about Biden's plan.
So Biden's plan, is really kind of a twofold process that they're looking at. First, they want to roll back those Trump tax cuts. Very short-lived. Back in 2017, the corporate rate came down. They're looking at pushing the corporate tax rate back up to around 28%. Same for upper-income taxpayers, those earning about $400,000 or more, kick that tax rate back up to about 40% there as well. Kind of after those have been reversed, there's some more ambitious plans that they're looking at things like capital gains rates, so taxes on investments, increasing those significantly, particularly for people who make $1 million or more, looking at small business taxation, looking at the estate tax. There's a lot of plans in the works. Nothing is set yet, but they're trying to figure out how this fits into a broader infrastructure plan and how much they need to pay for with these tax increases.
This, as we're heading into tax season crunch time, Laura, what's a sort of timeline for something like this to actually come together and get, both parties on side?
Well, this will definitely be slower moving than we saw with the stimulus bill that just passed. This is going to take a lot of time for Congress to get sorted out. They're calling it an infrastructure bill, but they're really looking at infrastructure, energy policy, education policy, health policy. So they're Democrats are kind of sorting out what will be in this broader bill. Pelosi and Schumer have kind of instructed lawmakers to work with Republicans, work with the other side of the aisle. It's unclear yet if this will be a bipartisan bill or if this will be similar to the stimulus legislation that Democrats will ultimately decide to go it alone. So they're kind of in that initial stages right now. I expect that we'll see more details come out later in the spring, maybe around May. Over the summer, the negotiations will intensify, and the White House and leaders in Congress are looking to pass something early fall, around September time.
Well, and I wonder if there's something about the optics of this. Would the administration want the U.S. and most Americans to be through the pandemic crisis? When they're hiking taxes, at least when it comes to vaccinations and more people getting back to work.
And this is kind of one of the things that's still kind of being figured out. The White House and congressional leaders have said they won't make the taxes retroactive. They won't go back to the start of 2021, for example. But they could kick in as soon as 2022. So they're very closely watching where the economy is, where consumer sentiment is. With taxes, you can always phase them in. So maybe only have like a slight increase in year one over a several-year period. All of those things are still to be decided. But that's one thing that the more cautious members of the administration are a little bit concerned about, of doing too much too soon on the tax front.
All right, Bloomberg's Laura Davison on the tax beat for us. Thanks so much for that update. We're going to be talking a lot more about the stimulus plan as well as President Biden's proposed tax plan with special guests throughout the week. Join us all week long as we mark the 1-year anniversary of the U.S. shutdown. We will be joined by Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Expedia, Peter Kern, Melinda Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the CEO of Peloton, John Foley. Just some of my guests on Bloomberg Technology this week. You don't want to miss it. And speaking of 1 year since the pandemic, next I'll be speaking with Seattle's Mayor Jenny Durkan. Her insight on the critical decisions made early in the pandemic, how they paid off. Of course, you'll remember it was the Seattle area that saw the very first confirmed case of COVID-19 in the United States. How the city is faring 1 year on. This is Bloomberg.
We are nowhere near the testing capacity that we need in this city to really open up our economy in a meaningful way. So we've been working with the governor, talking to the federal authorities. We need more testing capacity on a significant level, and we're also going to need more contact tracing.
Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan there in the very early days of the pandemic last April about the severity of which it was hitting her city, which saw the very first confirmed case in the United States of COVID-19. Since then, Seattle has been at the forefront of the pandemic response with the lowest number of cases, hospitalizations in the top 30 major cities. With me now, Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan herself. Mayor Durkan, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, you've probably lived a few lifetimes in the last year with the first case being in your area. Take me back to that moment, how terrifying that was for you as a leader compared to where we are today.
I think it is so remarkable to be here a year later and to hear that clip. Those early days were some of the most profound moments, I think, in my life, in the life of our city. So we knew we had the first confirmed cases, but because we didn't have testing, we were flying completely blind. When we started taking our first action, Seattle actually hadn't had any positive test cases because we didn't have any tests. But we had great scientific researchers who'd been doing a flu study. They went back and tested some of those and realized that we probably had over 1,000 cases in our region. And if we didn't act within 6 to 8 weeks, we could have 70,000 and 1,300 deaths. And so we were looking at two terrible choices. One, not take any action until we knew more, which meant there would be more sickness and death and maybe overflow our hospitals. Or two, start taking drastic actions and know the impacts on our economy. So it was a very bleak time then, but it has improved enormously now.
Do you feel like the crisis is over, or do you feel like there's a long road ahead?
I think the crisis is far from over, and I would urge everyone to have some caution. I heard that the clip about testing. We ended up getting our testing capability by making a deal with South Korea to get enough testing capability for the Seattle area. And we've done now almost 700,000 tests, 1 in 3 people in Seattle. That helped us know where the disease was and kept it down. In the same facility where I opened an Army hospital about a year ago, this weekend we opened the largest civilian-led vaccination center. And we have to get vaccination shots into arms. Until we do that, we're still at risk because this virus, it is so transmissible. Variants are on the rise. And so we really need people to still, even though we are so close, we can't let our guard down. We have to wear our masks, socially distance, and be cautious because we've seen in Europe now, Paris is going backwards, Italy's going backwards, Ireland's in still the highest stage lockdown. The variants are very dangerous and can take hold very quickly.
Now, as you mentioned, you've turned the NFL stadium into a mass vaccination site. You have publicly said you want Seattle to be the first major U.S. city to have vaccinated 70% of its population. How likely is it that you're going to get there?
We will get there if the federal government gives us the vaccines. Right now, we don't get a direct allocation. We're not one of the cities that does. We rely on the state and King County Public Health, and then our partners at some of the hospital systems that are getting allocations. But we need to greatly increase how much vaccine we get. We gave 2,200 shots on Sunday, but we're capable in that facility of doing over 20,000 a day if we get the vaccine. So if they give us the vaccine, we will get it shots into arms.
So let's talk then about how the Seattle economy recovers. You were very aggressive early on about the shutdown and prioritizing safety. Of course, you've got business owners out there who've said it's been incredibly tough. Some businesses have not survived. Where do you expect the Seattle economy to be, let's say, a year from now, once we are hopefully through this, given the measures that you have in place to continue to support the economy?
So we're fortunate because we had some strong sectors of the economy. Our tech economy, for particular, remains strong. Our port economy was impacted at the beginning, but is picking up thing. But it's really our small business economy. Over 250,000 people, about that in Seattle, were employed by small businesses. That's about 5 Amazons for Seattle. We really need to focus on those industries and to make sure our small businesses come back. We have many empty places in our downtown. So I'm very focused on a downtown recovery. How do we get small businesses back and keep them vibrant? How do we make sure our arts and culture are activated again? And how do we get our hospitality industry and our tourism industry going? It's also going to require us to focus on some of the other things that during the pandemic have been hard. CDC obviously said we had to leave people who were experiencing homelessness in place. And we have increased, like all the major cities on the West Coast, increased visible homelessness. So this week I've announced and will be announcing some very large endeavors to make sure we bring more people inside and give that economic stimulus to our small businesses, both in their neighborhood commercial districts and in our downtown core.
Right. I know homelessness is a big concern there in my area, the Bay Area as well. As you mentioned, Seattle is home to tech giants like Amazon. Of course, you've got Microsoft not far away. Is there more that you want big tech, big business to do to help the local economy?
I think they can, and part of that is working with us so that we know, this pandemic affected everybody's lives, how we live and how we work. And every company in America now is evaluating, the brick and mortar locations. How often will they actually bring all their employees into a brick and mortar location? How many will continue to work from home? We're having a lot of conversations with them because having those employees, particularly in our downtown core, is part of our strategy to get it back to the level of vibrancy that we had before. People will want to live downtown if they can walk to work. And so working with those sectors to really understand and working together how we make sure that any new business model, particularly a work from home model, takes into consideration the need to maintain our urban centers and have that really vibrant cores that we need.
Meantime, we were just talking about the president's tax plan. Those hardest hit would be those making over $400,000. We've got the stimulus now making its way out into the world. But you say you need more vaccines. What can the Biden administration do that would really make a difference for Seattle?
So last week, a number of mayors from cities across America, in both what people would consider Republican mayors and Democratic mayors, though most of us are nonpartisan, really urged direct allocations, because if we are the closest to these problems, we've seen when mayors work and are empowered, we can really get to the problems. And so right now, the allocations go to pharmacies and to the states and to some tribal partners. We'd like the administration to give or ensure direct vaccinations to the cities so that we can make sure that we get people vaccinated. America won't recover if its cities don't recover. That is the heartbeat of America. And so focusing on those cities and really working with local governments, I think will be good. I will say this, the Biden administration has been very, very supportive since they came into office. They've met with mayors probably more in these few months than the previous administration did in the entire 4 years. And so I think you'll see a renewed focus on helping local officials really meet some of the issues and problems they have. Because I do believe, again, that, the economy of America really relies on us doing well. And we will come back, but this is going to be a tough road. This isn't an on and off switch. And when we turn the dial to turn down the economy, it will not spring back quite as quickly. And so we've got to be very intentional about that.
All right, Mayor Durkan, thank you so much for joining us on, such a momentous day, and appreciate you taking us down memory lane a bit and talking about where you are now. Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan there. Meantime, billionaire Pershing Square founder Bill Ackman has donated 26.5 million shares of the e-commerce company Coupang to the Pershing Square Foundation. The amount, worth about $1.3 billion. Ackman was an early investor in the company, which priced its share offering last week above the marketed range, raising $4.6 billion, valuing the company at approximately $60 billion. The company's market cap now about $87 billion post-IPO. And as we had to break, speaking of valuation, Stripe overtook SpaceX and Instacart thanks to a $600 million funding round. Its value has now jumped to $95 billion, becoming the top valued U.S. startups. The online payments processor has made its two Irish siblings, brothers, John and Patrick Collison, worth $11.4 billion each. Talk about the luck of the Irish, or just hard work. Happy St. Patrick's Day. This is Bloomberg. Hollywood loves movies about Hollywood. The Netflix film Mank, about Citizen Kane screenwriter Herman Mankiewicz, received 10 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor. Mank bringing Netflix one step closer to winning the coveted Best Picture award for the first time ever. Lucas Shaw joins us now. Lucas, talk to us a little bit about what the significance of this is for Netflix, given that they only recently, started making original films.
Yeah, I mean, look, Netflix is about 5 years into its efforts of making original films. It's scaled up really quickly from making a handful a year to now making more than 50 each of the past 3 years. It has sought and spent a lot of money campaigning for Oscars as a validation of quality, because there's always been this stigma against sort of TV movies, and Netflix has tried to replicate the full gamut of movies from kind of the cheesy TV movie to big Hollywood blockbusters. It's gotten a ton of nominations over the past couple of years. This year is yet another kind of high mark for them. I believe it's 35. And if they could finally get a Best Picture award, I think it would sort of dispel this idea that Netflix movies are somehow less good than the movies you see elsewhere.
Well, you had a really interesting newsletter out over the weekend talking about how award shows, of course, we just watched the Grammys, the importance of them may be declining. Obviously, viewership has plummeted in the pandemic period, but longer term, how much will they really mean?
Yeah, I think for any filmmaker, and that's an important constituency for Netflix, winning an Oscar is still a big deal. We're looking at what will probably be the least watched Oscars on record, or at least in modern history this year. Some of that is the pandemic. Some of that is longer-term trends of viewership going down. Some of it is that you didn't have a lot of movies come out last year, or those that did were kind of the indie variety. But it's still the #1 award show and one of the only TV broadcasts that gets viewership on par with major sporting events. It's pretty much a bunch of football games and then the Oscars. And so even if the Oscars declines as much as, say, the Grammys and Globes did, it will be much bigger than either of those. And it will mean a lot to Netflix. It will kind of be a fitting apex or moment in its transformation into a big entertainment company and not just a tech company.
Meantime, Netflix is cracking down on shared passwords in an effort to get more customers to pay up. What can you tell us?
They've toyed with this a few times over the past couple of years. Netflix has known for years that there are millions of users who are using other people's accounts, either ones that they are stealing or ones that they're just kind of bumming from friends. They have tried not to make a big fuss out of it because they've been in growth mode. They don't want to alienate their customers, and they're just focused on kind of getting as many people to watch their shows and be excited, and they figured they could convert them into paying customers over time. In certain markets, Netflix is now so established that I think they're focused a little more on eking out all these incremental subscriber gains, places like the U.S., and so they will continue to experiment with ways of kind of nudging people to pay. I don't think they're, even what they're testing right now, it's not immediately going to shut you down. It's just going to give you a prompt.
All right. Lucas Shaw, All Things Hollywood, thank you so much for that update. Menk, we'll keep our eye on it. Coming up, the COVID pandemic marks the biggest vaccination campaign in U.S. history, fueled by some of the greatest achievements in technology and science. We will speak to Nubar Afeyan, co-founder of Moderna and flagship pioneering CEO, about the vaccine progress over the last year, as well as the challenges ahead. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, recapping our top story. U.S. stocks hitting record highs Monday on growing optimism about the budding economic recovery and progress on vaccines. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta has a snapshot from New York. Hey, Kriti.
Well, Emily, at the top of the show, we talked about that tech outperformance in today's trading session, but there's one name that really sticks out, and that name is Apple, gaining up as much as 4% on the day and taking its supply chain with it. Now, I want to spin this forward to the Asian trading session because, of course, we know some of these supply chains extend into Asia. So if we see this dynamic happen here in the States, we could actually see it happen over in Asia as well. Flip up the boards, and I want to bring you to the next story on today's docket, and that is that corporate tax hike that Joe Biden's administration is talking about, increasing the rate from 21% to 28%. This is where tech really comes to the forefront because this could actually disincentivize some of that repatriation of money that tech companies were actually incentivized to do under the Trump administration. So that could, of course, impact some of those big tech names, longer fundamentals. And lastly, I want to hit that vaccine story. AstraZeneca coming under some hot water today, or getting into some hot water today, I should say, after its candidate was suspended in several European countries. Its stock, though, still up on the day. When it comes to its stock performance, still underperforming. The big comparison, though, the big winner in the stock market among its peers, Moderna, up over 100% on a yearly basis. You can just see that in that chart. So lots going on in the vaccine space, Emily.
All right, we're going to talk to Moderna co-founder Nubar Afeyan in a moment. Kriti Gupta, thank you so much. For more now on vaccines and how Facebook is trying to do its part to fight misinformation, we're joined by Bloomberg's Sarah Friar, who of course covers social media for us. So Facebook is introducing some new tools today to flag vaccine misinformation. Sarah, what can you tell us?
Facebook is being a little bit more explicit with its messages for people about when they may be seeing something that is false. So they're going to give a little bit more context instead of just redirecting people to their COVID-19 vaccination info page the way they did during the U.S. presidential election. They're saying very explicitly, if they are seeing vaccine hesitancy, they will say that the vaccines have been thoroughly tested, as noted by the WHO. They're really trying to undo years of vaccine hesitancy that has bubbled up on their platforms.
Now, I guess my question is it too little, too late? I mean, vaccine misinformation has proliferated online on sites like Facebook now for a year, and much longer than that if you talk about vaccines in general. How well is, what they're doing in general really working?
A lot of critics think it is too little, too late, because when you look at some of their policies, like now going to ban repeat offenders, you're sort of missing the fact that this hesitancy, this vaccine skepticism has trickled into family groups, into neighborhood groups, into parent groups. It has become something that it's not just the wellness influencers and the anti-vaxxers that are pushing it. It has become more mainstream. And so they need to do something about the fundamental way their platform works, which is by highlighting content that sparks emotions like fear and shock. So I think that is maybe a bigger factor that they're not considering.
All right, Sarah Friar, thank you so much for that update. For more on the latest vaccine rollout, we are joined now by Moderna co-founder at Nubar Afeyan, who is also the CEO at Flagship Pioneering. Nubar, it has been a long year, and obviously Moderna's vaccine has been a standout success, but we still have hundreds of millions of Americans who don't have it and many more around the world. I'd love to start, now that we are a year into this, with your thoughts on where we are and what the biggest challenges are for the vaccine rollout that you see ahead.
Well, Emily, thanks for having me again. Yes, it does seem like a very long year. In fact, here we are back in March, and it feels like we're stuck in March a little bit. The feeling of time having frozen, I think, has afflicted all of us. It's been a very tough year of personal loss, of economic loss, and yet it's been a pretty triumphant year in terms of science and collaboration coming forward with solutions such as the vaccines. And we have quite a lot of work yet to do. Clearly, the vaccine has been produced. We've got multiple alternatives. We have supplies that have been ramped up, certainly in the U.S., increasing day by day. And yet we need to make sure that the distribution is up to par to the availability, and that we get as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible, even while we keep our sights on variants and other threats that continually have to be dealt with in order for us to truly contain this pandemic.
How much do you think vaccine misinformation on sites like Facebook has actually held the process back?
It's hard for me to quantify, but I'd say qualitatively, there's been a lot on social media, and I'd say even more broadly on media. There's just a lot of speculation that it's hard to tell apart how much of it has an agenda behind it and how much does not, and it blurs. But it definitely is the case that it's difficult to know who to trust and who to follow. Clearly, there are folks whose voices we've trusted. Certainly, the government experts, health experts, have been consistent in their advice, and our sense is that people need to follow the medical profession and the data far more than speculation and conspiracy theories.
Now, what is your reaction to several European countries, including the biggest European countries, temporarily suspending the AstraZeneca vaccine due to abnormal blood clotting? Do you think it should be permanently halted?
Emily, that would be impossible for me to comment on by virtue of what I just said, which is that it's very much a matter of data and facts as opposed to speculation. And I'll be the last person to add my speculation to it, because that's what that would be. People commenting on it generally don't have the facts. I have a lot of respect for our colleagues at AstraZeneca, and for that matter, everyone who's working on developing a vaccine, I think, is doing their utmost to share information and be able to deliver real solutions. But at the same time, we're going to learn a lot as the vaccine comes to the market. And as we detect certain things that we need to pursue them, wrestle them to the ground, and through a scientific method, be able to delineate that which is causally linked versus that which happens to be seen, but given the large numbers, cannot be linked to the vaccine. And until that's done, and I'm sure that the authorities are taking a cautious approach to doing just that, I think speculation is not helpful one way or the other. So I would say, under the current circumstances, I think everybody is maximally incented to ask the right questions in the right way, get some answers, and then make the right decisions. Everything else is going to just hurt people's lives, hurt their health, and we definitely should not engage in that.
All right, so let's talk about Moderna more specifically. Where do things stand in terms of regulatory approval to get more doses into a single vial, and how could that speed up the supply as you work to deliver more orders?
Well, Moderna has, over the last few weeks, said that working with the FDA and other regulators, we have, in fact, increased the doses per vial, which will simply afford for some more efficiency. We've also been announcing trials starting for a younger cohort, certainly the 12 to 18 range, even younger folks from 6 months on beginning to be tested. And then we also have announced that we've just begun dosing the very first variant booster shots. That's yet a different version of the vaccine. And then finally, just today, Moderna announced that we've also started testing a different version of the spike vaccine altogether called 1283. That is a more efficient from a storage standpoint, easier to handle, potentially a next generation version of our vaccine. So we have not, our R&D engine, albeit working on different issues than last year, which was all about, can we even make a vaccine in that time frame? Now we're working on multiple versions, multiple target audiences. We're doing everything we can to add to the armamentarium that we can deploy against this virus.
Meantime, I have 4 children, and every parent is wondering when children will be vaccinated. When do you expect your pediatric trial to read out the data? And can you give us any indication of what a shot for kids might look like? Could you get 2 in 1?
Emily, I don't want to get ahead of the company in the sense that obviously we are working hard to advance our program so that we can put out kind of more concrete information. We haven't yet done that. Certainly, we're working hard to make sure that we get vaccine for younger ages as soon as we can. It's probably not going to happen in the first half of this year, but we're working hard for that to be the case in the second half. And just as soon as we can run through the trials and assure safety and efficacy, as you've heard, I'm sure we are testing different doses because on the very young, it may be that a smaller dose may suffice. So we're working on all aspects of those questions and recognize, since many in the company have young children, that it's our responsibility to make sure we get absolutely everyone covered.
And then when it comes to your next generation vaccines, the South Africa strain, the UK strain, can you give us, I know I'm asking you very detailed questions, but can you give us any more detail on the timing of when we might see progress there?
You know, the FDA provided guidance saying that we're not going to be required to do the same kind of trial we had to do with the original vaccine, and that what's going to be important is to show neutralizing antibodies. That we expect we'll be able to see over the coming relatively short period of time. That's kind of counted in months, not many months. And once we have that data, and if we can show a robust production of antibodies, particularly to the strain, particularly the South African strain, then I think we'll be in a position to talk to regulators about the potential use of these as boosters. We expect that the original 1273 vaccine may be supplemented, if needed, by the booster. But I'll remind you that our data so far, after 2 doses of the original 1273 vaccine, and here we are a couple of months after it entered human use, talking about the original versus the next version, which is in and of itself, I think, quite an interesting dynamic, given the where we were a mere year ago, where we didn't even know what the virus is. But we definitely think that through a booster approach, we'll be able to continue the protection, adjust the protection, and again, get as many people covered against new threats as we can from this virus.
Okay, Noubar Afeyan, we've appreciated having these conversations with you over the last year. Thank you so much for joining us, Noubar Afeyan, co-founder of Moderna and the CEO of Flagship Pioneering. Okay, coming up, productivity, relocation, hybrid, cost efficiencies, all part of our vocabulary in a new remote work environment. They are just some of the trends measured in the latest report on remote work from the CEO of Upwork, Hayden Brown. She'll be joining us to break them all down next. Some of the findings may surprise you and your boss. Work shifting is next. This is Bloomberg.
I do think we are seeing the end of office centricity. We expect that the majority of people will work from home and home offices in the future.
For most of us, we want to get back into the office. We want to have human contact, have discussions and debate. And the technology of Zoom and Google are good, but it's not yet the same as being in person.
Being in person, many companies taking different approaches. Many CEOs saw it a different way nearly a year ago. That's the CEO of Shopify and Netflix there. My next guest company just released a report on remote work and the U.S. labor market over the last year. Upwork found 36% of the American workforce performed freelance work in 2020, and more than half of the workers who are new to remote work due to the pandemic are now considering freelancing in the future. Joining us now for more, Upwork CEO and President Hayden Brown, the latest guest in our work shifting conversation. So Hayden, do you think the CEO of Shopify or Netflix, who's going to be on the right and the wrong side of history?
Thanks for having me, Emily. I'm definitely with Toby from Shopify on this one, because I think what companies and talent found last year was this huge ability to control their work lives to a greater degree when they were working remotely. You know, they lost control with a lot of things from the pandemic, but what they gained was, on the freelancer side, a lot of autonomy in when, where, and for whom they're working. And companies are starting to figure out that with remote work, suddenly they can unleash a lot of different things for their business, including tapping into a totally different global workforce of independent talent that can do critical things for their businesses. And that is something that they desperately need, and they do not want to go back to the old ways of working. They really need this talent working for them going forward.
So, in terms of your report, what are you finding trends in terms of trends that surprised you?
I think, we were actually not that surprised by how well remote work is working for so many folks. I think what's surprising is a lot of the clients are just starting, a lot of businesses are really just starting to figure out how well this can work for them. And this is where I think the next year, 2 years are going to be so eye-opening for companies, because the conversation over the past year has been about where. The conversation over the next year is going to be about who and how. And I think that's where so many companies are going to be really transforming their workplaces and their work practices to take full advantage of the skills that they gained over the pandemic in terms of remote work. So even as they reopen offices, and even as they go back into those offices, they can still take advantage of so many of those skills to tap into talent pools that are not necessarily in those offices, that those are distributed teams, remote teams of both employees and independent talent. And I think that is where so much of the exciting changes in the work landscape are going to be going forward. And I think a lot of the data in the report hints at those benefits that both companies and employees and independent talent are all seeing across the spectrum of the work world.
So talk to us about the rise in freelance work. Is that something that you expect to keep up this year and next year?
Absolutely. So there was already a huge shift in workers into freelance before the pandemic. That accelerated massively over the past year. And when you talk to people who just joined the freelance economy, 60% say they could not, there's no amount of money that you could pay them to go back to a full-time employment job. And I think, again, that speaks to this idea that people are really benefiting from a lot of the autonomy and flexibility that freelance careers have given them, as well as recognition that a lot of newer generations, particularly in the workforce, recognize that the traditional employment model is not all that it was cracked up to be. And they saw that during the 2007-2008 recession, work was not as secure as they thought being an employee. Now today, they've seen that again. And when we interview freelancers on our platform, they tell us that they actually feel more secure being a freelancer today than when they were doing full-time employee work going through a recession. And that's because on average, they have 4 clients. They have a steady set of people that they're working with. And they know that even if one of those clients stops a project or goes out of business, they can still keep earning as a freelancer. Whereas if they're a full-time employee, if they lose that job, they would be out in the cold. So I think there's this reality that a lot of workers are waking up to, that freelancing actually has a much more stable and secure profile than what it's maybe perceived to be. The reality is very different.
So take me to 5 or 10 years beyond the pandemic, when it is safely behind us. We've heard people like Mark Zuckerberg say, 50% of Facebook will be remote in a decade. But I guess I'm curious whether you think that will indeed happen, or if over time things are going to go back to the way they were once we've got this in the rear view mirror.
I think what we're going to see is 2 changes. So yes, workplaces like Facebook will indeed be much more remote, like Mark says. So that is true. I think what we will also see is companies will have a much different mix of employee and independent talent, because what we see with our customers is companies saying, wait a minute, why would I hire and limit myself to local talent and full-time employment talent when suddenly I can access a dynamic pool of people who are available to work for me through a freelance model, who have incredible skills that I need, who can be available at the drop of a hat, who can do small and large projects. Like, this is a very different model when it comes online and people are available at the flip of a switch, essentially. And by the way, this is deep work that they are building relationships with these clients and these freelancers where they're working together time in and time out over months and years. So the projects might sometimes be small or they might be big, but this is a different model. So it's going to be hybrid, remote, and freelance teams working together.
Okay. Upwork President and CEO Hayden Brown, thanks for sharing your view of the future with us. And a reminder, we've got big conversations all week long related to the new working environment and lessons learned as part of our pandemic special series, 1 Year On. On Bloomberg Technology this week, I'll be joined by Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi, Expedia's Peter Kern, Melinda Gates of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Peloton's John Foley. All conversations you don't want to miss. Coming up, we will hear from IMAX CEO Rich Gelfond, why he has no worries about competition from streaming services and the future of theaters post-pandemic. And as we go to break, a look at some of the media companies that scaled up productions and saw plenty of subscribers this year, including, of course, Netflix and Disney, as well as Discovery and Roku, all making big plays in the last year. Our coverage of Bloomberg Tech, 1 year since the U.S. shutdown, continues. This is Bloomberg.
Asia pretty much opened up over 6 months ago and China 9 months ago. So we've seen what it means for business. Once it opens up and people feel safe, they not only come back to the movies, they flock back to the movies. So in China, we just finished Chinese New Year and the market was up 33% from its all-time record year. In Japan, a couple weeks ago, we had the #1 movie of all time, as well as IMAX #1 movie called Demon Slayer. And then 2 weeks later, just this last week, it beat the record set by Demon Slayer. So where it's open, people are dying to get back to the movies.
Yeah.
IMAX CEO Rich Gelfond there talking about the return to theaters, expecting consumers to flock back to theaters eventually. We'll see if that indeed holds true. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. This Monday, we've got a huge week planned as part of our special pandemic series. 1 year on, special guests, including the CEOs of Uber, Expedia, Melinda Gates, Peloton, all conversations you don't want to miss, their view of the last year and what happens next. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.